Hey guys, another video for our How to Do Stuff in Japan playlist and our mini-series on raising kids in Japan. Somebody who saw our recent video showing the system for kids, elementary school kids walking to school together, and the sort of the system designed for that. That person sent us a link to an article that they'd read talking about how independent Japanese kids are, and it's sort of a difficult one. Again, have to start this video by saying, of course, not everybody in Japan thinks the same, and not everybody in Japan does the same thing. So with these sort of videos, of course, they must be generalizations. We can't make a list of what every one of the 127 million people do. They're generalizations, but in Japan in particular, generalizations are generally true, because it's that sort of society where people do tend to do the same thing, even if they disagree, and we'll get to that in a minute. So it's understandable that if people came to Japan and watched what happens with kids here, that you would get the impression that kids are independent. A lot of kids are independent here, but independent is possibly not the word that we'd use. Not quite sure what the right word. Toyed with the idea of using the word autonomous, but that's not quite right either. We've used the word robot before in relation to some of the behaviours in Japan, and some people object to it and get all emotional about it. But it is often true that a lot of the behaviours in Japan are programmed. That everybody's taught to do the same thing and programmed to do the same thing, and that's what they do. Some people object to the word programmed, and they object to the word robot, but it just is often the explanation. If you look at it in those terms, quite often it does explain the behaviours, and that's what's happening with the kids. You know, we'll use that example from the walking to school, because some of you guys saw that video, and the person who actually talked to us about that article had seen that video, and that's probably a good example. Is that the way that worked was the teachers designed that system. They said, okay, they plotted where all the kids lived on a big map. They plotted where all the kids lived, and then said, right, this guy's the furthest and the oldest, so he'll go to here and he'll go to here. And they plotted the course through the streets, and then they gave a map to all the parents, and then for the first few days, the parents would walk with the kids to the assigned meeting places, and then the group would move to the next place, and the parent would be there, and the next place the parent. And then as it got closer to the school and to the busier roads, there was teachers at those busier roads to meet up with them and walk with them and sort of guide them, and basically show them, this is the routine, this is where you'll go, this is what you'll do, you know, make sure when you're here you stand and look for the traffic and this sort of thing. And then they slowly became more autonomous, and the coming home was a little bit different because the older kids weren't with them. So they did the same thing. The teachers actually walked with the kids back to where the parents would meet up with them. So this kid goes to this point, okay, that parent's there, okay, bye to that kid. Walk to the next point, okay, that parent's there, bye to that kid. And they did that for about a week, and then stopped. And then from then on, the kids are supposed to be doing it themselves. And that's what people see. That's the sort of thing people see. There's a lot more examples of that. We know kids who travel to school by train who are 7, 8, 9 years old, and they will walk to the train station, get on the train, and travel to school by train. Get off the train at the other end, and then walk from there to the school. We know a kid who's 10 who catches 2 trains and a bus, because he goes to school in the big city, and it takes 2 trains and a bus to get to the school in the big city. Other kids walk. You'll see kids walking and riding bikes, like you can see there, and you'll see them doing that 7 o'clock in the morning, and you'll see them doing that 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, because what they'll do is they'll have Juku or club at night, and so you'll have kids maybe 10 years old, from 10 years old to 18 years old, walking to and from Juku, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. A lot of the Juku don't close till 10. So anytime up till 10 o'clock at night, you can see kids walking the streets, either with friends or just on their own. It's very common to see kids on their own because, of course, as they get closer to home, their friends branch off, and you'll see kids walking 9 o'clock at night, 9:30 at night on their own, or riding their bicycle 9 o'clock, 9:30 at night on their own. We know kids who are left at home on their own. Both parents work, and so the kids come home in the afternoon. One of them's 8, the other one's 9.5 or something, and they come home in the afternoon, look after themselves until the first parent comes home at 6 o'clock, whatever that is. There's a lot of examples of sports weekends, going to sport on their own, things like that. And in a lot of countries, of course, usually parents take them and bring them back by car, or in some countries in Europe by bike, don't they? But here it's really common that they do it themselves, and that works most of the time, because they've been programmed to do that. Okay, you walk to here, you go to here, you do that, you catch that train, you catch that bus. Where it falls down is if something unexpected happens, because obviously 6-year-old kids don't have enough world experience to make decisions when something radical happens, you know, and we do see tragedies. You know, didn't mention it on that video about walking to school because it just sort of wasn't the sort of the format for it, but what actually does happen, probably generally that system is probably safer, because it's probably easier to see a group of 6 kids walking together. It's probably easier to see than one kid walking on their own. So in some ways it probably does make them safer. Unfortunately, what we do see is occasionally an old guy going too fast in his car, or, you know, recently there was a lady playing Pokemon Go as she drove her car, 32-year-old playing Pokemon Go and driving her car, and so when she wasn't paying attention, she hit a group of those kids, and this is what we see happen sometimes: is an old guy or some fool playing Pokemon, or someone not paying attention, or the kids not paying attention. And that's the other thing that we've seen firsthand, is that occasionally the oldest kid who's at the front crosses the street without paying attention. And, you know, he's been programmed to walk that way, and he's been programmed to stop and look, but they're kids, you know, they're kids. And this is where that system falls down, is that now and again one of these kids isn't paying attention because he's looking at something else, and leads a group of these kids onto a street or something, and no one's paying enough attention, and they get hit by a car. And that does happen. That does happen. Of course, it's hard to work out how many kids are saved by walking together in the group, and how many kids are lost by being in the group when they're hit by a car or a truck or something. It's, you know, that's a terrible statistic to even contemplate, but there must be a number. There must be a number, you know. But the point is that this is, you know, what people are seeing here is, when they come here, what they're seeing is independent. Isn't it great how independent Japanese kids are? Yeah. So when everything goes well, yeah, isn't that fabulous? But occasionally, of course, you know, it doesn't go well. The other one we see is occasionally a kid will get lifted off the street and just disappear and never be seen again, or a kid will get lifted off a street and found, you know, next to a river somewhere later, or occasionally, you know, we've seen ones where kids will get lifted off the street and held captive, you know, in some old guy's house until someone finds out about it or something. We get those stories too. And again, not wanting to give the wrong impression, we don't get those stories a lot, but we get those stories. And obviously, again, the system works really well until you get some bad person come along, in which case these kids are really vulnerable, because again, they're only kids. They're not switched on. They're not switched on enough to be aware of what's dangerous and what isn't. And Japanese culture being what it is, it'd be too easy for one of these old guys to come along and lead one of these kids away, or snatch one of them off the street, or tell them a lie and make them go with them or something. You know, that sort of stuff is what occasionally happens here, and it would be too easy, you know, and that's always, you know, the problem with that system as well. The other interesting thing is that when you talk to other parents about this, we recently were talking to other parents about the group going off in the morning, and and it's interesting that when you get the people separate away from the rest of the group and talk to them about these things, you quite often find they have their own concerns as well. And I'm actually a bit worried that they're not paying enough attention, or that they're too young to be doing it on their own. They'll quietly say to you. Now, of course, this is often the case. We've talked about this on previous videos as well. This is often the case. Japanese people will often tell you that they don't like something. Not often tell you, actually, that's not quite true. Occasionally, a friend or a family member will talk to us and admit that they don't like something. It's not real common. People don't usually say they don't like things or that they don't like the system. They usually just say, oh yes, that's just the way it is, and they go along with it. But interestingly, occasionally, if you have a sort of relationship with a friend or a family member where you can quietly talk about one of these things, they will admit it. And a couple of the parents have admitted recently that they were nervous about the kids walking to school on their own. But again, because that's the system, and the school said, right, the first week the parents will meet the kids and the teachers, and then it'll stop and the kids will do it on their own. And everybody goes, hi. And even the parents who don't like the idea, who are worried about it, they too will say hi, and sometimes the parents are both working and there's no parent at home, and so that system sort of works, or one of the parents, maybe the mother's at home with a baby or something, and that system works. But quite often one of the parents could go in the morning with the kids, or meet up with the kids in the afternoon, or even have a roster where the parents take turns doing it, but they don't. Because again, as we've talked about this a 1,000 times before, when there's a system in Japan, even if whether it's a good system or a bad system, if that's the system, and everybody accepts it. And anybody who's suggested that there's a better way, or that perhaps we should rethink this, is considered to be rocking the boat. And as was mentioned in another video, a person who suggests another way of doing something could be told that they think that they're smarter than everybody else. What is it with you? Do you think you're smarter than everybody else coming up with your own plan? And that's no exaggeration. Very rarely would someone say that, but that's the sort of the thinking that happens. If there's a system that's been that system for 50 years or 100 years or whatever, 500 years, who knows how long they've had that system. If that's the system, and you come along and suggest there's something wrong with the system, or that there's a better way, then you're suggesting that you're smarter than all those people that have gone before. And if you do suggest that you might want to reconsider it, they'll likely go, and then just not do anything about it. So getting a bit off topic there. So yes, independent. Kids in Japan are independent. Well, are they? They've been programmed to do these certain things, and that all works well unless something goes wrong. So, again, the parents, we heard a story from a friend recently about they left 3 6-year-olds in the house on their own for half an hour while they went and picked up another kid from somewhere, and came back and found that the kids were eating snacks or something. They'd got something out of the fridge that they shouldn't have, and they were eating it. Isn't that bad? They weren't doing what they were told. And it was like, well, it's 3 6-year-olds. What do you expect? This is why generally 6-year-olds aren't left on their own in a house, right? But how much better? There's a bunch of kids walking home on their own. There you go. There it is in action right there. And again, isn't it good that they're taking snacks out of the fridge rather than building a campfire in the middle of the lounge room, So, and this is the thing, when things do go wrong here, those kids that just crossed the street there were paying attention, but really common. We actually captured it in that last video about walking to school in the rain. The kids actually went across a crossing like that, and there was an adult standing there at the crossing with the little flag, and she said to them, the walk light went to don't walk, and she said to them, stop. But she said it really weakly. She didn't have any authority in her voice at all. And so she said, stop, and it was raining and the kids were under umbrellas. Stop, she said, and because it's gone red, and because the next thing that's going to happen is the light's going to go green and the cars are going to go. And stop, she says, stop, stop, she says, stop. And because by then the light is red and the kid's in the middle of the road. And then slightly after that it went green again. So that's the video that triggered that guy to send us the email, or lady, not sure who you are, and said, you know, don't like the look of that at all. You know, a bunch of little kids like that walking on their own, don't like the look of that at all. So, you know, admittedly that particular group weren't walking on their own. They had one of their parents was walking behind them, right? That particular group, but everybody else that appeared in, you know, that we saw on that day off in the distance walking in their own groups, of course there was no parents with them at all. So if you are a parent in Japan raising kids, you're going to come across this, and you know, you sort of, most of the time you got to go with it. What you do in your own house, of course, is your own business, so you can decide for yourself what you're comfortable with in your own house. When it comes to them walking to and from school, we've actually been sending the unskilled labourer as an escort every morning and every afternoon, and going to continue to do that until such time as it seems that they're safe. But in the meantime, they're kids, you know, and no matter how hard they've tried to program them to walk, to do what they're supposed to do and stop and look both ways and do all that sort of stuff, you know, they're kids and they're distracted and they're talking to each other and they're looking the opposite direction, and you'll quite often see 7 or 8 of them together and none of them are paying attention. And a car's coming, or a bunch of bigger kids are coming really fast on bicycles, and the kids just aren't paying attention, and they're all over the place and they're all in their own little worlds because they're kids. You know, little kids like that, they're all like little hippies. You know, 6-year-old to 10-year-olds, they're all like little stoned little hippies. They're all, you know, looking at the flowers and the birds and the cars and the leaves, and there's an interesting stone, and you know, they're talking about dinosaurs, and they're off in their own worlds. They're not looking out for danger. You know, they're not looking at the entrance to the convenience store for danger from the truck coming out, or, you know, they're kids. They don't think like that, do they? They're not alert to dangers yet. So, you know, and then those parents that expressed some concern actually said that they were pretty pleased that there was a big alert parent walking along behind the group, you know, and they were quite happy with that idea. And nobody's said anything, nobody from the school or anybody else or any other parents that anybody has said anything about it at all, which, you know, so the bottom line is, if you have kids, if you raise kids in Japan and you're faced with this situation, you know, you have to draw the line. I mean, this is the thing with stuff in Japan. Most of our how-to videos, almost all of them, advise with going with the flow and doing what everybody else is doing. But occasionally you do have to draw the line, of course, when it comes to, you know, the safety of your kids or the health of your kids, of course. Now and again you have to draw a line. It's good to be diplomatic and gentle about it, and be aware of other people's thoughts on the thing, and you know, be considerate to the other people around you. But, you know, when it comes to the safety, and we've had no kickback at all. The other parents seem pretty happy actually to have someone along. So yeah, so as far as kids being independent, it's probably not the right word. You know, autonomous in the same way that a drone or a robot could be programmed to do a certain thing. You know, it's programmed to do a certain thing, the kids are programmed to do certain things, and if all goes well, that works out quite well, you know, and they will. You can see them, they go to Juku. We know kids that go to Juku, 10-year-old kids go to Juku after school, and they have the onigiri, rice ball in their bag, and they get to Juku and they sit down and have a rice ball first. That's their dinner, and then they start studying. And, you know, generally they are, you know, the argument is that by having them do everything themselves like this, it makes them sort of independent, but it really doesn't, because what it is they're doing what they've been programmed to do by parents or teachers or their senpai, and that's the way that programming works in Japan. Everything comes from above, from parents or teachers or senpai, but it doesn't make them independent thinkers. You know, that saying that they do it on their own, so that's good for their, you know, that makes them independent. It's not really, they're not independent thinkers, because we see this as people grow up. In actual fact, it's the opposite. generally 6-year-olds, 10-year-olds are reasonably independent thinkers, you know, the world over, right? You'll find 6-year-old Japanese kids are pretty much the same as 6-year-old Swahili kids or Indian kids or American kids or Australian kids or whatever. The kids are all the same, you know. Wonderful, you know, and they sort of are independent in their thinking and free in their thinking, which is why the programming doesn't work real well, because they're not following the programming real well. But it also is often the case that you will see kids change. We've known kids here that, you know, friends of kids of our friends and neighbours and people, and we watched them grow up, you know, and they'll be often real sort of free little hippie characters when they're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, and then they start junior high school, and they really get the independent thinking thing just pushed right out of them. Because as all the programming and all the other stuff gets sort of inputted into them, actually there are people here who talk about inputting information when they talk about teaching people things, and it really is like that, and you'll see that free-spirited thing, not always the case, but more often than not, you'll see the personalities sort of fade, and people end up all the same, and we've talked about this on the videos before. The thinking ends up all the same and all uniformed. And if there's any Japanese people watching this, they'll probably try and defend the status quo by saying you shouldn't criticize that, because everyone wants to accept that these are the way things are done and that everybody does things the same way and everything else. So there's no way you could say that having the kids do their own thing when they're young results in them being independent adults, independent thinking adults, because it doesn't. It doesn't. It's, you know, it's very rare to meet an independent thinking Japanese adult here. Everybody sort of pretty much goes along the same path, you know. Quite often it's an excuse. There's a lot of parents here who are just so wrapped up in their own lives that it's an excuse for them not to have to look after their kids. And it sounds a bit harsh, but it's just true. We know a lot of examples of that. We know a lady who went off to Tokyo when her daughter was 8. She left her daughter in Nagoya with her husband and went off to live in Tokyo because she wanted to get a job there that she really wanted at one of the universities, and off she went. And she only sees her daughter, you know, a few days here and there throughout the year. Last time we had a decent holiday here, she went off overseas for a holiday without a daughter. Off she went. Hardly spends any time with the daughter at all, and we know lots of people here like that. Lots of fathers, we talked about this before, fathers who spend no time with their kids at all, you know. So quite often it's just an excuse. You would not believe, if you lived in Japan, you would not believe how disconnected a lot of families are here, where a lot of the parents spend almost no time at all with their kids, you know, and that independent thing, let's independent thing, suits them, because if the kids are doing everything on their own, you know, the kid goes off in the morning, goes to school, after school gets his onigiri from the convenience store and goes and sits in the Juku and eats his onigiri for dinner, and then does his homework at the Juku and comes home at 9 o'clock and has a bath and does his homework and goes to bed. You know, that leaves the parents free to do whatever they want to do, doesn't it? So, we'd replace the word independent with the word, well, some harsh people might say neglected, and, you know, we could make another video on that altogether, the results, the negative results of this disconnected family thing where people aren't spending time with their kids. I mean, you know, we could make a whole video about that. That's a sad thing. So some people would call this neglect, you know. Some people just say it's sad because the families aren't spending time together, very little time together, and, you know, or some people might call it programming. So it's complex. It probably deserves another 3 videos, actually, this topic. It's a complex one, but anyway, there it was. Independent kids in Japan. More videos coming soon.